I'll go into a couple of things, just general market conditions, and some interesting, I guess, anecdotes about the new accounting laws. We're seeing in the office sector today that people are using space differently. There's a lot more people working remotely, a lot more people working in smaller spaces and more collaborative spaces. So in spaces that you're seeing, the general build-outs are different. We're seeing it in accounting firms have been a leader in that with mobility, with people auditing and being out of the office, hoteling and other types of things. But that's becoming more commonplace. I represent a technology company in Manhattan. We're doing a deal at the World Trade Center now. 50% of their people work remotely. So all over the country, all over the world. And it's an interesting phenomenon, and it's becoming more and more prevalent as the allure for attracting talent and getting talent is more and more difficult. From the office sector here on Long Island, it's been very interesting. Over the last 10 years, the primary demand has come from the healthcare sector. Okay, Northwell alone has taken millions and millions of square feet. That's been the primary driver of the demand. Look at Lake Success when Canon moved out. ProHealth took one of the buildings. Northwell took one of the buildings. And when I was handling for Blackstone, 1111 Marcus, the old Sperry building, we did a condo for Northwell for 250,000 feet. Did the Haines Celestial deal in the front building. And last year we sold, or 2 years ago, we sold Northwell the additional 900,000 square feet. So just in Lake Success alone, Northwell has taken down about 2.5 million square feet. I recently sold them. I represented Sterling Bank in the Astoria acquisition, and we sold the property. Northwell ended up buying it, but we ended up having a lot of demand from developers for redeveloping that site for alternative uses. So that's been the primary demand factor, and that's really sucked up a lot of the vacancy that's been on Long Island. Where does the supply come from? Long Island, I've been doing this since 1985 here on Long Island. Since about 92, after you had the big run-up in supply, since 92, there's been about a 6% increase in supply since 1992. Okay, so that's like 0.25% a year. There's no new supply. Where does the supply come from? It comes from people leaving Long Island. JP Morgan Chase, who is one of my larger clients on Long Island, they have left since 2000 2 million square feet of space. That's where the supply comes from. They left 200, 300 Jericho Quadrangle, 600,000 feet, down by the train station, 105, 102, 100 Duffy, another 400,000 feet. They just left 900 Stewart Avenue, another 300,000 feet. And 1985 Marcus, they left about 250,000 feet of that building. So that's where the supply comes from. And it all started with Northrop Grumman, right? Northrop Grumman had 35,000 people on Long Island. Every one of these buildings in Melville was Northrop Grumman. And so, you know, they left. They now have 250 people left on Long Island. So that's where the supply comes from. Just looking at the statistics, for Class A and Class B, about 620 buildings, 619, 48 million square feet. The vacancy rate is down to 8.7%, which is, you know, a very low rate. There's not very many large blocks of space and quality space. You can see it. Adecco left this building. Now this building's pretty much fully leased. 225. When that sold, that building is pretty well leased now, well over 90%. So all of the nicer buildings, 58 and 68 South Service Road right here in Melville, they're virtually 100% leased. So there's not a lot of quality space out there in the marketplace. Rents, interestingly enough, if you look at it, have been relatively flat. Long Island has been a relatively flat rental market forever. When I started, I was renting a building in Garden City, 400 Garden City Plaza. The building had, we were renting for $25 plus $250 electric in 1989. Okay, fast forward 30 years, they're getting $29 a foot plus $3.50 electric. Now, when you take that into account, real estate taxes were the J21 plan where you got a 50% abatement that phased in over 10 years. Taxes were $2.50 a square foot, okay? Operating expenses were $4 a square foot. We were building out space for $18 a square foot. Today, taxes are $8.50 a square foot. Operating expenses are $7, and build-outs are $35 a foot. And rents went up $4. So how does it work? Back then, it was 13, 14% interest rates. Now there's 4% interest rates, and that's really what has made the market survive. Taxes on Long Island are, in Nassau County, are 25% to 30% of the rental income. So basically, the government owns the office buildings in Nassau County. The landlords just kind of work to get a few cents on top of that. It's really remarkable. Asking rents are average $26.69, but that's because a lot of the lesser quality space is what's available. So the better buildings are in the 30s now, and mid-30s for some of them, but deals are around 32 in the top buildings in the marketplace. But because there's less quality space out there, the rental rates show a little bit lower. Nassau County office market a little bit higher. The vacancy rate, there's 28 million square feet of 48 million in Nassau County. But we're really not seeing much, as you see, in the way of rental increases, even though vacancy is going down. Suffolk County rents are lower, especially because you have the Hauppauge market where they converted some industrial buildings to office, and those rents are relatively cheap comparative to the Class A buildings. But again, the vacancy rate is a little larger in Suffolk County, primarily because of the central Suffolk market out in the Hauppauge area. Long Island Industrial is a completely different ballgame, and it's quite interesting what happened. No one wanted industrial buildings. 10 years ago, buildings were selling for between $50 and $75 a square foot. Rents were $4 to $7 a square foot. And $7 a square foot was like in the, Port Washington Park, right Harbor Park Road, over in that area. Otherwise, industrial rents floundered for years, prices floundered for years, and what's happened in this cycle is quite interesting. You have New York City, where the price of real estate has exploded, and the rezoning of Williamsburg, Greenpoint, Bushwick, and other parts, Long Island City, have created huge upzoning for multifamily residential, office towers, and other things. So these owners of these industrial buildings, mostly users, have basically said, I can sell my building for $400 a foot. Okay, I bought it for $250,000. I'm selling it for $7 million. Not a bad day. They come out to Long Island and they're buying a building for $75 a foot. And they don't care, because the price of what they received and what they're paying for, they're doubling their size and still paying less than what they've had. So that's been the great demand from the city coming out here, which has driven prices up. Now prices for industrial buildings are averaging $140 a square foot, which was unheard of 5 years ago. And they were $75 a foot 8 years ago. So it's really been a dramatic difference. If you look at it, we have a 3.6% vacancy rate. There's really almost no industrial. In fact, some industrial buildings are selling for more than office buildings. And some of the single-story buildings, like where Arrow Electronics headquarters was, beautiful office building that they converted to office, turned back into an industrial building. So literally taking office buildings and making them industrial buildings again. And they're doing that because there's very small lack of supply, and the demand between organic growth here and the incoming traffic from the boroughs has created that demand. It's quite remarkable. Everyone's heard about the Newsday sale. So Harts Mountain came in and bought the 40,000 square foot building on 50 acres. That was Newsday's headquarters. Newsday's moving to another area of Melville and shutting down their printing facilities. That building sold for $1 million an acre for a developer to come in and build state-of-the-art industrial buildings, which is remarkable to say you're paying $1 million an acre, plus demo cost, plus zoning change, all the things that go into it just to build an industrial building. So those rents have to get up to $15 to $17 a square foot triple net, which is the price of office space in Happo. So it's remarkable the change and the lack of supply. And one of the reasons why you're seeing not a lot of activity now in the industrial market is people can't afford to move. There's nowhere to move to. And so rents are going up for the first time. Rents are over $10 a foot in many of the markets out here. And that's just been a big bright spot for the commercial real estate market out in Long Island. Nassau County rents are upwards of $13, $15 a foot. You see the upward trend there as the vacancy rate declines. And there's really very little supply in the marketplace, 3.9%. But most of the space and a lot of the space that's out there is the worst space. So it's not space that you're going to walk into and move into. It's space that literally you just can't occupy. So the next thing I was going to talk about briefly, to keep on schedule here and get everyone out by 10 and go into the accounting, is basically the new type of leases that are being done. They used to be synthetic leases that people did back in the day, where you could get an off-balance sheet transaction for a capital lease, as they were called. And now with the new lease accounting standards, how do you get some benefits? So the new FASB, which most of the Joe had given all of these things, the right of use assets, the present value, leasing decisions. Now we're getting much more involved with the CFO of corporations to see how it's going to impact the balance sheet, and doing these financial leases through a hybrid structure, or a lease versus own is a big analysis we're doing now for companies to see, does it make sense just to buy a building as opposed to lease a building, because it's on the balance sheet anyway, so why not own it instead of lease? I think you're going to see a lot of smaller companies that can get the financing, purchase buildings. In the industrial sector, and Tom can attest to this in the back, who's with Griner, most industrial users prefer to buy the buildings, because with the 504, you borrow 90% of the acquisition, and you can, when you purchase the building on a 20-year amortizing basis, it's literally almost the same cost as leasing a property. So most small business owners, medium-sized business owners in the industrial sector prefer to buy, but lack of supply is the big reason against it. When you look at the lease versus own and the hybrid leases and the synthetic leases, basically direct ownership is when you're buying the property, 100% goes on the balance sheet at 100% of the cost. Synthetic leases, typically 10 to 25% of the value is on the balance sheet, but those are only 5 to 7 year leases, interest only. And so synthetic leases, because of the short term, those are financed by commercial banks. Credit tenant leases, which are your standard lease where, like a Walgreens is a credit tenant lease where they buy the building and then they do a sale lease back, sell the building, and that's like 85 to 100% on the balance sheet. Hybrid leases are a unique structure, which 40 to 60% value on the balance sheet. And the beauty of those is, instead of a 5 or 7 year lease, you get a 10 to 20 year lease, because those are financed by insurance companies and pension plans as opposed to commercial banks. So the key thing about the hybrid lease that you need to know is that if it's under $25 million for the building and the improvements, it's not going to be worth doing it because it's too expensive. And the other factor is that the insurance companies and pension plans want a investment grade or nearly investment grade type of credit in order to do these transactions. And so those are the two big hurdles. You're not doing it for a small mom-and-pop type company. You see here on this slide, it's an interesting, it shows you the escalators and the 15-year impact on your balance sheet and your income statement in comparative basis on what it would be as an ownership, a landlord lease, hybrid lease, and synthetic lease. And all the structures are funded in the debt capital markets. The structures allow you to reduce or eliminate equity financing costs for core properties. Financial reporting for all is superior to direct ownership, and your hybrid synthetic lease structures allow not-for-profit tenants to potentially avoid paying property taxes because you technically don't own the building, but you technically own the building, but given the structure, it's a right-of-use asset that Joe had mentioned, but you have, the beauty of these is you have the residual value. The residual value is not counted in this structure, and that's where the value proposition is. Because under these leases, the tenants are guaranteeing 80% to 90% of the residual value at the end of the term. But that is not on your balance sheet, so that is where the benefit comes in. Pricing is based on the tenant's credit, and when you do a hybrid lease, you get about a half a basis, 50 basis points higher than your standard lease. That's the cost of doing it through the insurance company or the pension plans. I'll get to an example rather than going through all this given the time, but you'll see here on this slide, which is really where it really shows this is the balance sheet and the income statement side. So on a $100 million purchase on a 15-year lease, on a hybrid lease, you're paying about 4.65% interest-only structure, no amortization, fixed purchase option, $100 million, and the residual value guarantee is 80%. Okay, annual cash for the GAAP basis is 4.65, which you can see over on the bottom line. So you're straight lining the 4.65 over here. This is a standard landlord lease that would be on your balance sheet, so it would escalate. So you start at a certain rate, and it escalates over the term. And then your last is ownership. If you had a full ownership of the building, this is your straight line full ownership. So as you see, you're saving about $2.5 million a year off of your balance sheet. So you're saving over a 15-year period, $34 million on your income statement, and $25 million comes off your balance sheet. So when you're looking at these different type of structures, this is probably the one that's going to come to the forefront for credit quality tenants that are doing transactions that are 25 million or more. These transactions also don't have to, they could be pools. So if you were a company that were acquiring 10 different properties, you could pool them together and do this same type of hybrid transaction, lease transactions, if they were smaller values. Now, something you should note, you can't do this on an existing property that you own. So you can't do a sale leaseback and create a hybrid structure. It's got to be a new transaction. But I think it's an interesting proposition for many corporations that have credit quality tenants, credit quality, investment grade quality credit, that they can do these type of transactions. This shows you also the hybrid versus ownership with debt. You start your debt at ownership at 6.5, and that comes down over your amortization period. But again, compared to the $4.5 million, you don't have as much savings on the income statement, but you have a much greater savings on your balance sheet because you have the $50 million versus the $100 million in your on the assets and liabilities on the balance sheet. Some of the larger accounting firms have made comments on this. Deloitte, under the new standards, lease payments, as long as you have the right to use assets. Basically, they're saying, big accounting firms are saying that the hybrid leases meet the criteria of GAAP and the IRS, so that you can actually do these transactions. We have around the world, and that's this. I wanted to get into one other thing before we run out of time, and that's the opportunity zones. Everyone hears a lot about opportunity zones. For the typical owner-user, which is the primary focus as opposed to the investor, the opportunity zones are not similar to your 1031 exchange. So if they have a building that they're selling and they want to move to a new location, that's not really the vehicle for it, because the 1031, you might as well go to an area where you get the full benefits. On a opportunity zone, after 7 years, you have to pay back 85% of your capital gains on the transaction. So what is really a benefit for people who, it's the only, I guess, deferring of capital from if you sell stocks, sell artwork, sell any other type of asset, is when you can use an opportunity zone and defer that cost. The beauty of the opportunity zone is that if you hold it for 10 years, all of the profits are tax-free. You pay your 85% capital gains after 7 years on the initial investment or the gain that you had. But anything beyond 10 years, you're not paying capital gains. So if a company had a capital event and they had profit that they could then transfer, then you look at opportunity zones as potentially moving your facility to. The other hair on the opportunity zone, especially on Long Island, is that you're required to put the property into use within 30 months of acquisition. So if you don't have the zoning approvals in place and you don't have your plans and ready for construction, which is going to take 12 to 18 months to build a new building, you're not going to meet that 30-month threshold. Yeah.
In the opportunity zone, I have two concerns per se. The first is you go into the opportunity zone, so you go into an economically depressed area. So the risk of the real estate actually appreciating and turning around over that period of time is high, in my mind. And second is the initial capital. After your initial investment, you have to, when I say you have to make a significant investment into the property to upgrade it. So there's two big risks that I'm struggling with when I talk to clients about potentially putting opportunity zones. More so the risk of the investment, because you're taking good capital and putting it into a depressed area. So I'm hesitant. So, from a tax standpoint, it's wonderful, but from an investment standpoint, I do have.
I agree fully. If you don't make a profit, it doesn't matter that they're all tax-free. There's nothing to get. So it has to make sense from an economic standpoint that there is the ability. So for example, if you were an industrial user and you were looking in Nassau County and you could find a 2-acre, 4-acre piece of land in Hempstead, which is an opportunity zone, which is a good location in central Nassau County, you could build a state-of-the-art warehouse there. The probability, I would say, is pretty good that that holds their value. And if you were selling your company or doing some type of financial transaction where there was a gain that you could offset that gain and put it into a facility, that zone, I would say, it's definitely a viable option. Calverton is another one. So if you were building a big distribution or manufacturing facility and you have those kind of gains that you could put there, then that's great. The other thing that they don't know yet, because it's not been decided, is whether at the end of the term, when you're selling it after 10 years, whether you could do another exchange, right? In real estate, you could do 1031 exchanges in perpetuity and defer your taxes. It's not yet known whether you have the ability to do that in opportunity zone or not. And there's so many funds being created because all these hedge funds and private equity guys and other people that have that type of compensation that can then put it into opportunity zone and defer their taxes further and hold them for 10 years and pay no taxes on that gain. So there's a lot of money out there chasing opportunity zone properties. So your point is I think the number one point in an opportunity zone, will it make sense financially? Is it a profitable endeavor? And if it's not, then you're only deferring your gains for 7 years, which then you have to pay 85% of them, the other 15% you don't, and then you could be stuck with the property. So I think it's important to understand what you're doing. But from a user perspective, if you can find it, it's a great opportunity if you can use those benefits and you can find a property that's suitable for your needs. I think that's.
Thank you.